And good evening. Welcome to today's edition of the Culture Network State of the Union. I'm Kimble, your host. I'm the president and CEO and founder of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition and the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership's Global Policy Initiative. Tonight we have a great show lined up. We're going to start with a quick update from Rob Slater on the Houston special election. It's one of the last seats that were vacated by the death of a member of Congress, and there's been a bunch of irregularities in that race. So we want to talk about that, give everyone a little heads up and some updates. And then we're going to turn to our main issue tonight, which is healthcare, particularly anti-competitive or antitrust behavior that is affecting Black-owned healthcare facilities. So with that, let's start the show. There we go. Rob.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing all right, man. Just coming from a Little Leagues football game. You know, anything that makes us happy in the world, I try to still keep it going, man. How are you doing, brother?
I can't complain. You know, so same with that. My kids are all grown, so I don't have any Little League games to go to. But it's always good to hear people going there and watching the kids play. So it's all good.
Absolutely.
I won't keep you. I know you had a long day, and we got Dr. Wendy's waiting in the background. But talk to me about Houston 18 and all this craziness. You guys have been almost 2 years without a congressional member of Congress. So,
it is it's a travesty, man. We just had the special election, November 4th. Out of a great field of candidates, 2 candidates rose to the top and are going to a runoff. Christian Menifee, who's currently the Harris County attorney, and then former at-large city councilwoman Amanda Edwards. And so since November 4th, for 2 weeks, we didn't know when the runoff was going to be.
Yeah. Right.
It's crazy. Well, finally today, this president's sidekick, Greg Abbott, finally made a runoff election for January 31st of 2026 next year. But literally about a couple of weeks later, this new redistricting maps go into play early March 3rd, I believe, and March 3rd and March 4th. And half of Houston or half of this district will be voting for a whole new candidate for a whole new area for a whole new term. And so it is sad. It's a travesty. And so whichever one of these candidates that are running right now is going to have to do double time the work to educate the constituency, educate the people on what's going on. So these games at the end of the day will have some representation, but the damage would have been done. And it's adding insult to injury by letting this district go for so long without representation and then confusing them so much and disheartening them, because in the runoff election for January 31st, why would you vote for someone that's not going to really represent you? And it's just sad. So we're going to encourage everyone to vote regardless. We will say no, we will stand up, and we will go out and vote. But it's time for us and all leaders outside of Houston and so much. We need all the help that we can to bring voter education and knowledge and these tactics to the people so they don't get too much, disenfranchised. Voter apathy was at its highest in years. I think maybe 7 to 10% of the district of the runoff race got the voter turnout. Less than 10% of the entire Harris County. So
eligible voters, 10% of eligible voters voted. Is that what you're telling me?
It. Yes, sir. That is it.
So what was the turnout? I mean, what was that look like? The total of about 20,000 votes total cast?
Probably about 30,000, and we're looking at 4 to 5 million something. The population per se, but total voters.
It's like 700,000 in the district.
Yes.
Be the population, about 700,000. Okay.
So yeah, for the district per se, but it was also some other things on the ballot. There was a county, there was a city council at-large race that was on the ballot. There was also 17 Texas state constitutional amendments that was on the ballot, and the Republican Party use every tactic and trick that they possibly can. You know, Republican Party, they put out propositions, they put out amendments, and that's what actually bring their voting base to the polls. Right. Our Democratic Party, we put out ideas, and sometimes too often we don't even have a plan. And so they were able and all these 17 amendments, all 17 passed.
Wow.
Like somebody just went into the voting booth, put yes, 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 yes. And so voter education, it just has to step up. We incentivize voter registration, but we don't have nothing to incentivize voter engagement and actually turning it out.
So did you guys have a plan? Did you guys have positions on all those? Did the people running for those other offices have positions on those? And did they push were they using their operations to turn out or educate voters?
Even though, and that's the sad part. It depends on what YouTube channel you go to, what TikTok reel, what Instagram post, and every politician is saying something different because we don't have a unified message. That is the problem. And so now you don't have nobody even know what an amendment is by name, and what does that mean for them? You had bail reform on there. I mean, we just had in Texas now. It just passed that the 10 commandments have to be put up in every single school. The 10 commandments have to be put up. And so many of our educators and teachers have quit the education system because of religious beliefs. So the voters, it's so many in the community that is just now hearing this for the first time. And so it is just, we as a party have to do better in educating on the proactive end instead of being reactive. And we got our work cut out for us. So we got to get it together.
I will say this, and you and I talk, we could talk more, when we get on with the rest of the show, but I didn't want people to hear about what's going on in Texas. But the one thing is, the party, regardless, I mean, the party's been ignoring African Americans for a very long time. And so it's incumbent upon us to lift ourselves up and do our part. People like you have to, the Culture Commission, you guys have to just be engaged because no one's coming to save us. And, it's really, it's unfortunate. I'm glad they announced this election, but they did. I mean, I'm surprised anyone shows up. I mean, because the filing deadline is what, January 4th?
The filing deadline, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So January 4th, the filing deadline. Then the election is January 19th for the whole seat. So you're running the seat, but you got to file for the other seat. And then right after that, in March, whatever, first week of March, you got the primary. So it's basically 6 weeks later, you got a primary.
And then you got a primary. And I know on the Culture Commission side, we are anti-establishment. I beg to wonder sometimes if our own political party is okay with the voter apathy, because it kind of, the less people that's engaged, your candidate will actually win. We don't have time for that. And so we're encouraging everyone to just empower yourselves to just go vote, because when numbers don't lie, when people see that the numbers are there, they actually come out to talk to you, and they might just deliver on the promises they made to you. But if you don't vote, you can't, you lose your voice. You can't jump on social media and complain when don't have no skin in the game. So we got to get it together.
Vote and advocate. You got to vote. You got to organize yourself and go.
Sir.
Several cities, we're going to talk about this next week, actually. About 30 cities are getting rid of their DEI. Philadelphia just today announced they're eliminating their DEI government contracting. Atlanta's scheduled to do the same thing at the end of the year. And as much as that, everyone kind of poo-poos it. If you can't get government contract, you can't be an entrepreneur if you can't get a government contract. I mean, you could be an entrepreneur who's starving, but you can't ever get a job. If you can't get contracts, you can't do it. So people have to vote, and then they have to hold people accountable. So Rob, thank you for taking the time. I didn't want to keep you.
No, thank you so much. As always, thanks for having me on your show. You guys are doing great work and keeping you and your guests. It's these hard conversations that's whether live and after you guys, reshared and syndicated, that putting this type of conversation on the record. So you can't never say that you didn't know, that you wasn't aware. So if you say so, I'll tell you a guy named Kevin that he told you. So thank you guys for the work that you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. Good luck.
Bye-bye.
So now we'll bring on Wendy. There you are.
I'm
Dr.
here.
Wendy Muhammad, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for doing this. So I will say this: Wendy's one of my favorite people. There's a crew of about 15 people in FISIC that we work with who will travel around the country trying to make. When everyone asks me, we need solutions or whatever, I was like, I know people have solutions. I work with them every day. Chances are people just don't want to do the hard work to implement these solutions. But tonight we're going to talk about a really hard conversation.
Yeah.
It's complicated. So if you aren't in healthcare, you may not know. If you don't know antitrust, you may feel intimidated. But Wendy's going to break it down, and we're going to talk about some of the stuff that she's been doing and stuff we've been doing together. So, Wendy, what's going on with Black healthcare?
Black healthcare is in an interesting space, Kevin. And I want to say before I even start this conversation, because you already know, I say this all the time. I said this to you earlier today. I don't align myself with any party lines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm an
Mm-hmm.
issues driven voter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I don't just say I'm voting for somebody just because. So this is not coming from that type of slant. My interest is truly getting the healthcare services to Black people, especially in rural areas, and promoting and supporting Black entrepreneurs who want to go into healthcare and provide these services to our people. What's happening, Kevin, on the entrepreneur and on the developer side is that we are really running into a situation where there's a lot of anti-competitive behavior. You know this, a lot of antitrust violations, and nobody is saying anything. And this is true across the board with most Black entrepreneurs, where we just don't say anything. It's hard for us to get loans. It's difficult for us to navigate some of these areas because we have regulators who are coming at us. People file complaints and nobody really investigates, and then we just get shut down. And what's starting to happen, and it's been doing this, it's trickling down to the patients and to the people in the field. You and I talk about in some of these rural areas where the racism is very, very obvious and very rampant, and they're closing birthing centers and places where Black people frequent, and places that they need to provide some of these services are literally just being shut down in these Black rural areas. And it's a multifactorial issue that's going on. But when I think about, I'm here in Chicago and you're there in DC, we have some options. But when you think about our brothers and sisters that are in certain parts of rural Arkansas or Mississippi, where they don't have a facility for miles.
Yeah. If you live in Tuskegee, Alabama, you are 30 miles from the closest hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so when Black entrepreneurs say, okay, I'm going to open up something in those areas to serve my people, they run into regulatory issues. We run into supply issues with vendors discriminating against us, not wanting to provide supplies. We run into lending issues with banking. And part of our conversation today, I'm sure we're going to get to, is asking ourselves the question, what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? And it's easy to just say, well, let's just build our own. That's one solution, right? But it's a multifactorial approach that I'm sure we'll talk about today. But that's just an example. And I really want to hone in on the people who are desperate, like you mentioned, in Tuskegee, Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, some parts of Louisiana, where you got to go 30, 40 miles just to get to a medical facility to have a child in 2025.
Yeah. Well, I will say DC is not much better. I mean, if you live in Southeast DC, Ward F7 or 8, you
Yeah,
are,
that's true.
especially with traffic, you are almost an hour from the closest emergency room. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's a horrible situation. I do want to say, you're a healthcare expert. You're a business development expert first and foremost. But you spend a lot of time on healthcare, so I want people to know that. But you also have a museum, right? You've developed the Elijah Muhammad House. Is that say
Yes.
it right? Yeah.
Yes, Elijah Muhammad House. And the idea with the House Museum, Kevin, is that during the Great Migration, the majority of our people that migrated north, they were redlined in certain parts of metropolitan areas. And the culture that was developed from those migrants is really the foundation of culture and inventions today.
Yeah.
But what's starting to happen is with regentrification, all of that history is on the verge of becoming extinct. So we've been on a mission to make sure that people are saving those properties that are important to those underserved communities and telling those stories, because with things being torn down, people moving in, we literally are at the point, especially with things being taken out of school, where there won't even be any Black history outside of the old school griots where you just got to tell stories.
No, thank. I wanted to lay that groundwork so people get perspective as we talk about this conversation. So
Yeah.
when you and I first started having this conversation, we were actually talking about something else, and we got to the healthcare. And I was telling you a story about how there was a doctor of a radiology center in PG County, Maryland, that I'd come across that was being run out of business by the University of Maryland Health Center. And we were about how they would use all unfair tactics to get the guy out of business. And he was the only black radiology center in the whole mid coast, whatever this part of the mid-Atlantic area. And you go, I got a doctor in PG County, Dr. Dorman, who has the same exact problem at the University of Maryland Health Center. So we started talking, and those guys had knew each other and worked together, didn't know they were having the same problem. Sort of explain the situation with Dr. Dorman. You don't have to spend a whole hour on it, but just kind of give out like what was the impetus for them trying to get rid of him and what they did to get rid of him.
So the impetus, I believe, is corporate greed and racism. Where suddenly now you have a talented Black surgeon who opens and creates an institution that is serving and making a subsurgical specialty more accessible to his community, and in essence taking money away from these, what I call the big box institutions. And so there were a number of things. There's been a lot of slander. That's one thing that they do. And we've threatened, and I can speak on my own personal experience in working with him, where we had to make phone calls and say, hey, did you say this slanderous thing to our patients? I don't want to give too many details. Other hospitals, other doctors, slandering so that patients feel uncomfortable. Insurance companies at one point saying, hey, don't go there, go to this doctor's office. And then we worked and fought to the point where we got to the point where the insurance companies were recommending us. But everybody doesn't have that opportunity. Even things down to vendors who we knew would charge another facility, a white-owned facility, say half the price for medical supplies, and then double it for us, impacting our margin, which of course impacts our profitability. And then the other thing that they do oftentimes to Black-owned facilities, when they send in like intersaries, like fake employees and fake patients, and those people file fake complaints. And they know that if you keep getting these types of fake complaints or these baseless complaints, your insurance company is going to start looking at you crazy. You know, you can defend it all you want, but after a while, the insurance company is like, we might have to raise your rate because it might be something there. So this is happening over and over and over again to Black healthcare professionals that are opening their own facilities. Even if, for example, Kevin, they see a better way to treat a certain disease process. If they start to try to do that, then all of a sudden there's a tax against them, because the hospitals don't want people going to their facility where they may get this new cutting edge treatment that they're not necessarily going to get at the hospital. So this kind of thing that's happening in the background, there's threats. I can speak to myself. I was threatened.
Like what kind of threats? Like, what do you mean?
Death threats.
Really?
Yeah. People calling the front desk, threatening, front desk staff leaving because they're like, wait a minute, I can't take this. I ain't getting paid for this. So this is an industry that is very gangster, is very cutthroat, and you got to have some thick skin in order to be able to be in it. And I wrote about some of this in my new book in terms of helping people to recognize strategies. Because here's the thing, Kevin, we just chalk it up to racism. And we just chalk it up to, it's just hard being in business. But a lot of these things, in most cases, they are illegal. Yeah. And so we have to start putting solutions out there on what you can do if this is happening to you in your business. So
you kind of jumped a little ahead, but I want to, Tracy, can you pull up the letter that we did? No, it's good. The letter we did to the Department of Justice. I don't know if anyone can read this, but anyone who wants to download this letter, Wendy and I and a bunch of others, so Wendy went out and collected, well, there's about 15 doctors we found around the country that were facing these same pressures that you were talking about. And we sent a letter to the Biden administration's Justice Department. The DOJ had an antitrust task force, so we wrote a letter, and we met with that task force to talk about this. And when you want me to tell them what their answer was to us when we had this conversation?
The person was very sweet. She was very nice, and she listened to us, and she was very patient, and she was very gentle and gingerly. And basically, she said there was nothing that they could do about it unless maybe we got some press around it.
Yeah.
Or it got a little bit more eyes on it or was bigger. But in essence, in summary, if I remember correctly, there's nothing they could do about it.
Yeah, we were too small. They were dealing with too many $1 trillion businesses that were being anti-competitive, the big insurance and pharma companies, and so we weren't. Our little $10 million organizations weren't enough to be able for them to justify the resources, which I think brings another question. Why do you think the doctors, like you and Dr. Darman and some others, never sued for some of this illegal and anti-competitive behavior?
I honestly think it's because it's not where our minds are. I think what happens with a lot of Black entrepreneurs that are in business, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, whoever, I think that they become so focused on surviving and providing a service and trying to defend themselves against these attacks that the thought of let me stop and put together a lawsuit and find an attorney that they could even trust. Because that's the other thing. Once you start looking for an attorney, these people are, in cahoots with each other, or they've worked for one of your major competitors, and it's going to take you a lot of money to be able to defend yourself against them. So I just think that it's just not even top of mind. And I'm just saying that some of these things need to start being top of mind.
Yeah. No, I think we do miss out. I was at an event not too long ago, and there was a well-respected guy in business. I won't even say what kind of business he was in, but he'd gotten his first contract. This was not healthcare, but it was another industry. He got his first contract from the state of Ohio, and it was a set-aside contract. So he had a set-aside contract from the state of Ohio, and he actually went on to be fairly successful because with government contracts without a government contract you can't do it. With government contracts you can. But he was able to be somewhat successful. And I said to him, and he was African American. I said, well, you see all this assault against all of our industries, just driving everyone out of business. Why aren't you spending any money? I mean, these guys, Bloom and those guys will spend millions of dollars to hurt us. Why aren't you doing it? He goes, well, and he really didn't have a good answer. Like to your point, it's not in our DNA. Like with all the lawsuits, like 30 cities are getting rid of DEI or set asides, but none of us are suing. I mean, like, how do you, because people always say, well, what are my solutions? You even said, what are solutions? Well, if you're not willing to spend money on a lawsuit, you're not willing to spend money on a lobbyist, you're not willing to spend money, what other solutions are there?
Yeah, I think that, again, that's multifactorial, meeting with politicians, getting these issues out there on the forefront, because I think that there's enough of us in some of these districts that are Black entrepreneurs that are being discriminated against. In the case of the radiologist that you talked about, their competitor opened right up across the street, doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So there's enough of us that I believe that we could have some influence with our politicians, representatives, to say, hey, let's start putting this in front of policymakers so that we can have a voice. There's also things we may have to do from a consumer standpoint. We do a lot of boycotting where we say we're not going to buy this or going to buy that, but I think that has to happen across the board. Even if that, and then this is where it gets hard, Kevin, because in some areas you may know that a hospital is racist and that they mistreat people, but because it's your only choice, you don't have anywhere else to go, you can't necessarily boycott it.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Well, so you and I've had this conversation, so now I'm cheating because I already know the answer to this question. But we had talked about, like, when you reached out to the doctors, because we did a lot of research, you found like 15 or 12, almost all of them were afraid to speak up, right? So if the people who are injured aren't willing to the victims aren't willing to speak up, how do we engage the change we need?
Well, I think it's part of the warfare, right? Because they get them caught up in these battles, which puts them in a position, whether legally or other regulatory wise, where they say, hey, I can't really speak out because I'm afraid that if I say something to you, my competitor's going to attack me, or they're going to slander me some more, or do something crazy. I think we have to continue to be advocates doing this kind of work that we're doing. We have to continue to tell those stories. And I think at some point, I think we're going to get an audience, but we have to just continue to fight. And
Well,
I
one
think we
thing
have to use our voice. We got to use our stories. Because I personally disagree with just kind of laying down and saying, let me just wait to see what's going to happen. I think you know what's going to happen. They're not going to stop until you get put out of business, until you're completely destroyed and you're pushing a broom somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to me, you got to get your story out there, and you got to fight. You're going to have to go Harriet Tubman on them.
Well, you had worked on some legislation. You actually put a draft piece of legislation together to combat this. Kind of lay out for people out there, like, what were the components you thought about, if you remember, if you have it in front of you, like what you proposed doing?
So I put the proposals together, and I thought on a few points: the legal and regulatory remedies in your state, but we got to start locally. I think sometimes we also think about the federal government, and that just might be too big of a start. But let's start locally, starting with your local state reps. Make these complaints, write this stuff up, go to the press, get some media behind what it is. If somebody comes to you and threatens your business and threatens your practice, then go to the media. See if you can get some investigative journalism on them. Continue to expose. You're going to have to start dragging this stuff out into the light. Part of the problem is that these people are doing these things in the dark and nobody's saying anything. So you got the state antitrust and unfair competition laws that you can start to utilize, whether it's file a lawsuit if you have the money, or go to your local politicians. And this is probably, I know you're going to squawk at this, but there are some civil rights-based responses, Kevin, maybe a few left. I know you said that they're getting rid of, what was it, empowerment zones and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah, I was going to say, but then there's the consumer and market-driven responses. Okay, getting the word out there, going on social media, talking to the mainstream press, seeing if you can get somebody to cover you. See, nobody wants to be exposed. Because these institutions, these big box institutions, have positioned themselves as the saviors of our communities. Yeah. And so when you start dragging out some of this darkness out into the light, then they got to face it. Yeah. And then I also think we got to organize like what we do in physics and start having think tanks and conversations around how do we address this? Yeah.
Yeah. There are two things I want to add up to that. And we released a white paper earlier this summer in August on healthcare as a public utility. Tracy, can you pull that up? So for people in the audience, I don't know if you've seen it, Wendy, and I think you may have looked at it. But we actually looked at structures that could help, change the way we do healthcare, so that we could have more inclusion of underserved or minority doctors. Like we're letting people use empty post offices or other places or churches as urgent care with AI and other things, so that you can actually move more. Cut the overhead costs for people to be able to serve these rural, very, like in Tuscaloosa, there's tons of churches and there's at least a few post offices, right? Because that's the infrastructure that's there. And so we looked at that and looked at other funding sources. We talk about, like with your doctor, Dr. Ormu, and some of the others, what's the percentage of Medicaid money they get? If you have
they don't get that much. You have about 20% of the patients that go to these Black offices that are in the Black areas I'm not talking about the general ones that have Medicaid on a percentage basis, because we're a smaller part of the population. That number is a little bit larger, but it's very, very small. If you bill for $100, Kevin, you might get $20, $30 if as a Medicaid reimbursement, compared to commercial insurance where you might get $90. So you can't survive. Your business cannot survive if you only have Medicaid patients, because in some states, Medicaid pays 50% of the contracted rate. So $100 bill, you might get a $25 reimbursement. You're lucky if you get $40. You just can't survive. Can you imagine how many patients you have to see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did some back of the envelope calculations. This is by no way official, but we just did some thought that if 20% of the Medicaid population is Black and 5% of doctors, we're talking about not facilities, doctors are Black, 5% of 20% is 1%. So top line Medicaid reimbursement, assuming all Black patients go to see Black doctors, and very few white patients go see Black doctors. But let's make those assumptions. You're talking about 1%. But when you subtract out that most healthcare money gets spent on like other stuff, like not doctors, but pharmacies and radiologists and all those other, you're talking about less than 1% of that going to Black-owned facilities, especially when there aren't that many Black-owned facilities. Am I got that right? Is that right, or did I miss part of the conversation?
No, I think that's about right. And that's part of the challenge in a lot of these rural areas, Kevin, where if a lot of the patients in those areas are Medicaid patients, then that Black doctor can't afford to stay open.
Yeah.
And so, he or she can't afford to bring some type of cutting edge procedure or equipment or anything like that to that area, not on a Medicaid budget.
Yeah.
So this is a very complex issue that we really need some conversations in our community around. I really think we need to start having more think tanks and boards where we sit down and we talk about how are we going to solve these problems in our community. Because if what you told me today while we were waiting to come on the show about what'd you tell me about the states getting rid or having to get rid of some of their empowerment zones?
Opportunity zones. So yeah, so they have
opportunity zones.
Yeah, they have to restructure them all.
Yeah, I think, and then listening to Rob's conversation, we need some think tanks. We got to sit down and start talking about this, because again, I keep saying this over and over again, it's multifactorial, and I don't think we can think about it along party lines. We have to sit down, talk, come up with a solution and say, who's going to address our best interests?
Well, I'm gonna back a pedal a little bit on something. One of the things we have to like you said, Black think tanks, and trust me, I was looking at something Charlie Kirk, the guy that got assassinated, he had the Turning Point USA. Something about his budget was like $80 million a year, right?
For what, the think tank?
Yeah, his think tank was $80 million a year. Yeah. So I mean, you can't, so if based on your strategy, either you're gonna have to find people who aren't Black who really give you money. Again, in Atlanta, those women who had the give the scholarships, the Fearless Fund, they gave out those $25,000 scholarships, so $250,000. The guy who sued to stop that spent $2 million to stop them from giving away $250,000, and no Black people poured money in the fight or the affirmative action cases or any of those things. So, I mean, when we talk about solutions, that becomes something we have to address internally.
Yeah, but I hear you on that, Kevin. I think it's also us as a community, and I know this is asking a lot, but we got to wake up a little bit too, because freedom ain't free. And if I'm I love nice things myself, but before I go spend $350,000 on a watch, maybe that's some think tank money. I don't think it takes 80 million or 8 million or whatever you said his budget was, but
80. It was 80 million.
80 million. I don't think it's going to take no 80 million. But before I do that, maybe I need to give some of that 350,000 to FSIC so they can put together a think tank, or maybe some local think tank, so we can start figuring out solutions. And then we need to come up with metrics to hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah.
When we come up with these solutions, what's the timeline? And then who are we feeding it to? And then having a group of people to get behind it, to go to the politicians. So that's one aspect of it. And then we do have to start separating and doing some things on our own. That's another process. A lot of us already live in cities that are all Black anyway.
It's totally segregated. Right?
Already segregated. So we have to learn how to govern ourselves. And so we got a lot of work to do as a people.
Yeah. You know, as we're going through this, I'm trying to figure out, the money that, again, the money drives there. Like, the reason there aren't that many Black think tanks because there's not any money. Like, the white guys don't care if you exist, and the Black people don't care if you exist. So for Black people, it's just not a real, a real issue. No one knows how to. And I ask this question to a lot of people all the time, because I don't know the answer either. Like, SCLC can't figure out a way to get the money from them. Urban League can't figure out a way to get money to do these kinds of things, which is why no one's doing it, right? Why do you think, from the doctors, I know people are struggling to stay in business, but I think you're right about, instead of having a Mercedes, you may have to drive a Hyundai if you want to have a business that thrives. How do you justify that conversation to people?
I think it's a tough conversation because everybody doesn't have the consciousness for it. Some people really would rather just continue to try to strive and compete and hope that things stay status quo and that one day they'll get a leg up. So I think it's like needle in a haystack, finding people like ourselves, people who are on this podcast, who are willing to do the heavy lifting. Somebody's got to do it. Somebody had to be Harriet Tubman. Somebody had to be Martin Luther King. Somebody had to be Elijah Muhammad. Somebody's got to be that person to do that type of heavy lifting. Everybody ain't going to do it. Some people are going to say, I'd rather go and, buy
Most
my.
people.
And I would say, because you said, Black people don't care that you exist. I do think that there are, and I'm a hopeless romantic person, Kevin. I get on you about this all the time. I do think that there are people out here who do care and who are conscious. And if there is a vehicle created where they can participate, that they will.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are vehicles that exist, right, that they just don't, that they refuse to participate in. Not every vehicle is perfect. And I do think SCLC's existed for 6 years. They've written more economic empowerment language than anybody in the country. No one's lined up and beating down their doors to help.
But do people know that, right?
Yeah, I guess. Well, how do you break? There's one of our colleagues in physics, very well, will tell the story about how people in his universe actually knew the Obamas. Like they were close. They all, and he said they have houses at Martha's Vineyard and all this stuff, but none of them give money to this stuff. And you can't say that. You have to be purposefully ignorant not to know some of this. Where they sit, if they're sitting there and they don't know, that means they're trying not to know, right? It doesn't take. I'm not trying to put all, there's advertising, there's marketing, there's all that stuff, but some of this is people having the want, the desire to do that. And so I'm always curious, again.
I think it's dire also, Kevin, because some people are going to have to be made to participate, and that the times will have to get tough enough that force us to start to look to each other.
How much tougher do we have to get from where we are now? How much tougher do you think?
I think it's going to have to get a little tougher because I just think that we don't want to stop doing what we're doing to say, hey, I'm not sacrificing to help. When I hear, because of the way my mind works or your mind works, when people come to us and say, hey, I live in rural Arkansas, and there's not another hospital for 50 miles. They closed the birthing center. So if I have a child, I go into labor, I got almost an hour drive to get to the doctor. That does something to you and I. And so then we start trying to figure out, who do we talk to get them some help?
Yeah.
It doesn't impact everybody the same.
Yeah, I guess that's true. One of the things, as solutions that would go, like this opportunity zone fix or restructuring that's going to have to take place in all these places does give us an opportunity to request that some of these rural places be considered zones, and that in order for opportunity funds to get their tax deductibility, that they have to have some investment in these areas and some percentage of their portfolio being healthcare or whatever. I think we still have to push for that. Not only that, we've got to push for where the zones are going to be, but pushing for what projects get approved under what conditions, so that we make sure that some of this money does that. Because money is a big deal in terms of that. But again, there's nobody willing to invest in that, in that process to make it happen. Which is interesting.
It's interesting, Kevin. I always think about, and I remember saying this about 10 years ago in the office. I said, are we getting ready to become like a third world country where you have a big gap between the haves and the have-nots? I started seeing it coming about 20 years ago, but 10 years ago, I started going, well, wait a minute. And the reason why I say that is because we still have a system where we can loosely participate, depending upon, who's in our local and national offices. And I think about like my friends in Nigeria, and if you talk to them about the government and how things work, they're like, whatever. It's like they don't even pay attention to it and care about it. They just do what they got to do for themselves.
Yeah.
And are we ready for that in America? Because they couldn't tell you what those folks was doing. Some of them are knowledgeable about it, but they're like, whatever.
It's not my problem. Yeah, it has no impact on my life. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for my life.
They just ignore it, and they just do what they got to do, and they figured out systems and processes to work around it, to make their money and to live their lives. And so I always think about that, and I say, are we ready for that in the States?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, just we're talking about healthcare, we can expand to the larger economy, but if you just talk about in healthcare space, all this consolidation is driving is driving everyone else out of the space. So like the 12 or 13 doctors probably won't exist 5 years from now. I mean, they probably won't survive this process, especially if they keep cutting Medicaid and Medicare, and it requires the other systems to get bigger to compete with the other big systems. So there's no room for the small guy. So I mean, 5% of doctors are Black. That won't be the case 8 years from now, right? I mean, when there's this one group of doctors now age out of the system, we're not bringing in, like, there are fewer Black men going to medical school today than there were in the 1970s. So that is definitely, So you asked a really good question. That's why the people are so unhappy, right? People are very unhappy because they don't know. They know, like what someone said the other day, what Trump said, it'll give people a 50-year mortgage. So the average age to buy a house is 40 years old, and they give you a 50-year mortgage. So you're going to pay for a house till you're 90. Most people won't live to be 78. So most people will never own their house.
Yeah. And the other thing of that, you mentioned the doctors, and we are graduating some Black doctors. We have some of the HBCUs are doing a great job, but most of them are going to go into a system that they're going to be forced to comply with in order to be successful in their field. Yeah. And so again, it goes back to my question, are we ready to have alternative systems? Or in cases, like I said, I go back to Nigeria, I have friends that have a doctor that live on their estate.
Yeah.
And are we, and they farm their doctor out. You could go see their doctor, but are we ready for that?
Well, but first of all, you got to be rich enough to have an estate to have a doctor. I mean, I assume that 98% of people in Nigeria don't have their own estate with their own doctor.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Then everybody else is lined up at long lines at the doctor's office, or they're using doctors in the neighborhood or their own cures. Where are we with that? Because just to give you an example, when they started the government shutdown, before the insurance even expired, my premium went from $162 a month to $810 a month. And so if you think about that from an economic standpoint, the insurance companies can't afford for that to be the case, because most people just aren't going to pay it, and they're going to go out of business.
Yeah.
Okay. So if they don't come up with some new solution to get the rates down to where people can afford it, then there's so many businesses that are going to go under because of that. So the question becomes, what's most important to the powers that be? Is it having the power over people and making people choose between food and healthcare, or is it sustaining the economy so that they feed it and people can have what they need so that they can go to work? And it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Do you, I mean, you know how I feel, and I've said this, I think I said this on the show a couple of times. I am totally fine with shutting the government down until people figure out what they want. Like, I mean, we should not be borrowing money to send Elon Musk to the moon, right? I mean, that it makes no sense that we've got a $30 trillion deficit. This guy is a trillionaire. This doesn't make him a trillionaire, and we can't afford healthcare, but we can pay for him to have a rocket go to the. It makes a lot of this stuff makes no sense, and I think, you know.
But Keegan, how do you justify like the people, like all the government workers? You're right there in DC Metro that aren't getting paid. I know that the local economy there, I live there, so I know how much you guys depend upon people having government jobs. How do you justify that?
So that's a trap, right? That's a trap question, because things are they already laid off 200,000 people before the shutdown, right? So it's not like this was like something new. So by that standard, what do I do about the other 200,000? I mean, you're talking about maybe 20,000 that weren't getting paid, 30,000 weren't getting paid, but 200,000 are. Gotcha. We have friends who had to go back to wherever their parents are, right? So
yeah, it's a perspective that we don't get when we're hearing the propaganda, if you will, or the news PR that there was a massive layoffs prior to the shutdown.
Yeah, and also. Yeah, that's I think that's why you saw most government workers weren't really complaining, right? They were the ones who wanted to get paid, but they weren't up in arms. They're like, they knew that this was an existential. This is to your point, an existential fight, right?
Okay.
How do we determine what the government's going to do? And I think the only way to really get to that is, again, from a Black perspective, we don't get anything from the government anyway, right? I mean, we get less than 1% of government contracts. We get less than 1% of Medicaid. 10% of 4 million people on food stamps are getting $10 or $20 a month, right? I mean, so we're letting them make us fight a fight for nothing. I mean, Elon Musk gets more for his spaceship than we get for food stamps. So I'm not sure.
How true is it? Because I've heard people say that some people were getting like $3,000 a month in SNAP benefits, and I'm like, where do they do that at? And I don't know, but I hear about all this Medicare fraud, and I know I've been on that side. I've never been able to make Medicare pay anything more.
I think most of that is like, no, there are people who can scan your credit card and create a whole new identity. So I'm sure there's somebody who can do something. But on the average thing is I think it's $7 a day per person.
Like $350 a month or something like that.
About 200. No, so $7 times there's about 250, about 250 bucks a month is about the average. But again, that's the average. There are a whole lot of people who make less than that. And again, there's 10% who make $20 a month. Yeah, that's 50 cents, not even 10 cents a day or whatever. So there are a lot of people who make no money at all. But even if and then talk about housing, they got rid of Medicaid. They cut Medicaid in the budget. So that's going away. So we're fighting for this Obamacare is fine, but they were losing Medicaid, we're losing housing, and we're losing, regardless of the budget was just a place to say we're not going to justify or legitimize their budget by passing a spending bill, right? Because what that forces Democrats to do was to legitimize everything that was in that bill by passing the spending bill. And I just, it's gonna suck, right? But at least it's gonna suck in a way we can control it. versus it sucking outside of our control, right? I mean, that was what this was fight. Like, this is a fight if we're going to have, like, with the doctors, if they don't band together, they're going to lose, right? So the question is that maybe if they band together and fight, yeah, it might suck. Then some of them might have the reputation alignment. Some of them may go out of business. But if they don't fight, they're all going out of business anyway.
That is my point, that somebody's got to say something. And if you don't start speaking up, telling your story, talking about what is happening to you, you're not going to get any help anyway. It's like if your neck is in a noose, at least get your hands around it. Maybe you could do something. Yeah. But sitting there waiting, I just feel like is I just feel like it's a hopeless battle. And but we have to start saying.
What's the Churchill quote? It's like, you can't reason with a lion when your head's in his mouth. I think that's a Churchill quote. So, anyways, I think I don't know. I'm sorry Dr. Dorman couldn't come and tell a story. I think he had, because I've heard him tell a story before. It's very powerful.
Yeah. I also think we have to, if we're choosing, and these are things that we can do, just like we go when we say, well, buy Black. If you're choosing a doctor in your network, find a Black doctor and choose a Black doctor. Most of the time, your Black doctor is going to be way better than average, just because of everything that we have to do as Black people just to maintain in a particular industry. So if you can choose a Black doctor, find one and choose one. Let's get out of this mindset that because they don't look like us, they're going to be a better person. So let's start there. Let's start focusing on choosing a Black doctor. Let's also start working on being advocates for one another. So if grandmother goes into the hospital, or she's got an elderly friend that goes into the hospital, maybe somebody needs to go with her to start understanding what is happening. You got to be your own advocate. I learned that from Dr. Dormu, part of my honorary doctorate, right? Be your own advocate. You have to be your own advocate. Somebody's got to go. Somebody's got to speak up, tell you what to say, gather the data, sit there, with you. And then Black healthcare professionals also have to form alliances so that there's more of a support system for that radiology center to be down the street from us, going through the exact same thing that we're going through. And we've actually referred patients to each other, but there was no camaraderie to have that conversation. That's where that rugged individualism allows us to be pinched off and destroyed. And to me, between our two facilities at that point in time when all this was happening, we probably cornered enough of a market that if we got together and filed a lawsuit together, we probably could make a significant impact and draw the amount of press that's needed to kind of shame this situation into correction. So we got to start talking to each other, and we got to start fighting a little bit better as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I was at an event, healthcare event, a couple weeks ago, and there were Black doctors, and one of the things they said that there was a theory. I haven't researched it yet, but there was a theory that because of the healthcare situation in America back in the 60s and 70s, that Black people, the goal was for Black people to go extinct by like 1990. That was sort of the prevailing wisdom. Of course, we survived that, but the guy was telling a story about the cardiologist at Harvard. The head of cardiology at Harvard said the prevailing wisdom was that Black people didn't have heart attacks. That if a Black person came to the hospital with chest pains, or they just assumed it was gas or something, because Black people didn't have enough stress in their lives to have heart attacks. So so I have a Black cardiologist. So I say all to say I agree with you wholeheartedly that the way this works is we have to do more, and which is why I have these conversations. I mean, we're going to cover a bunch of, you've been to our policy. I'm just going to cover the gambit for the next 6 or I guess the next 10 or 12 weeks. We're going to cover every issue before we circle back. But it's a process that I need people to focus on, because whatever we're fighting for, we've got to fight. And this is why I wanted to.
We have to fight, Kevin. We got to speak up. Statistics show that people do better with doctors that look like them than otherwise. That you can Google that statistic. I don't have the number, but people do better. And again, let's stop being afraid. Just because you want a Black doctor don't mean that you don't like other people, that you got a problem with other folks, but let's start supporting our own. And I was at an event, one of our state reps, I think he might be a senator, Senator Preston. He was asking a large company, quasi-governmental company here in Chicago, what percentage of their contracts that they give out go to Black people. And so I was so proud of him because he kept pressing. They kept saying, well, the minorities, they give that number, and Black and brown, they give that. And he said, no, Black. How much went to Black? And they were so embarrassed. Finally, the man said, about 5. And he said, 5 what? 5%, 5 million. And this is a multi-million-dollar, probably $100 million facility. And they said $5,000.
That's about right.
Why am I saying that? Because we have to press, and we got to be very specific in our language. Find you a Black doctor, find you a Black dentist. Let's support. Because that's the only way. And so if something does happen systemically where they have to break off from the system, at least they've got enough patience.
Right.
Because you're going to pay for healthcare one way or another.
Right.
9 times out of 10, you're not just going to die in the street. There may be a few people dying in the street, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to find a way to write a check to take care of yourself. Yeah. So you may as well be in a position where you're with a Black doctor in an organization that if they do break off from the system, you could at least pay for it.
Yeah, totally. And that's interesting, the press. I do think, one of the things we've been focusing on with this process is that, DEI and all that, it was all fallback positions that make no sense in the overall scheme of things. What we really are saying is we got to fight anti-discrimination. We got to fight discrimination. And I think getting back to what's legal, which is you can't discriminate, enforcing people, like if they've only had $5,000 worth of contracts to Black people, there's no way that's done without discrimination. I mean, that's not right. You can't have an accident, you cannot statistically have that happen. It's just not actuarially possible for that to happen by accident. So I'm glad he asked that question. And we've got to force that conversation everywhere.
And we have to start pushing back instead of us just saying being in business is hard. It's hard to be a Black doctor, to open up your own facility. Yes, it may very well be, but the same thing that you're doing at the big box system, you can do in your own office if you're left alone to be able to do it. Yeah. And in order to be left alone, you got to say to somebody, leave me alone.
Right. And then you may have to call in some help. You may have to sue. You may have to do a lot of things. Our antitrust lawyer, we worked with when we were doing this, our antitrust lawyer talked with you, and we were saying, like, we're looking at this Maryland place. So I say this for everyone who's listening, or people who are in business, whatever business they're in, whether it's healthcare or not. But at the end of the day, we should all know what the anti-competitive rules are, what kind of state we live in, and how we can fight to make sure that, because there's a lot of consolidation across industry. I saw something about home building. There's consolidation. The tax code is written in a way now that people are able to absorb a lot of money, so that people are operating at cash and huge advantages. And we are not, just like during COVID, Black people couldn't get contracts to do medical equipment or whatever. The ones who did ended up being indicted. It's ridiculous. So.
Yeah. So what are you saying, Kevin, that everybody should study what their local antitrust and anti-competitive laws are?
Yeah.
Local and state. And if they find out that those things are being done to them, file a lawsuit. If you can't file a lawsuit,
file a complaint.
File a complaint, get the stuff out there to the media, speak to your local politicians, but don't just sit there like this is okay and that they're doing this to me and I just got to fight through it, because it's not going to stop.
Yeah. And it's not going to, you'll ask people for, like, we'll talk about fundraising for some of the stuff. People, I don't have that much money. They're having enough money. Well, if you let them box you into that small piece, maybe you're doing better than the person who works at Burger King, but you're not doing better than the guy you're not even the same game as white competitor who's got all the contracts. I mean, you've got to, you don't have to, I guess, but if you want, we can't be at the bottom. Like Atlanta, Georgia is one of the blackest, has most black millionaires in the country. Their wealth during slavery, the black-white wealth gap was 60-1. Today it's 47-1. So is it better? Statistically, no, but I guess numerically it is better. But if you're still at a 47-1 gap with the most black millionaires, you can't. You have to work to change that system. And then doctors, I mean, you can't be. I know doctors, oncologists, some of the oncologists in the country have these huge facilities, multi-million-dollar facilities. I don't know if there's any black oncologists with a multi-million-dollar facility in America. Like,
let me say this too, Kevin, and this, I know we got to go, but if we talk about the whole macroeconomic standpoint, closing the wealth gap is beneficial to America at a time when the dollar is plummeting. So to sit here and say, okay, it's okay to be racist and not respond, I think included in a lot of these complaints, we need to really begin to show that it's going to help your economy. It's going to help the general economy by allowing Black people to participate in the economy. If you keep us from participating in the economy, then we're going to continue to circle the economic drain, and it's going to happen even faster. So the fall is going to happen even faster. There's not enough white people to go around to service everything that
there's a shortage. That's why there's a shortage in all these jobs. There's a shortage in every career path in America because of that. But I will say to you that the powers that be have decided it's better for the thing to burn down than to include us. And that is a hard, like, with Hispanic, like people talk about Hispanic immigrants, like where they do all this for no one cares. They just drug them. I mean, they think what you're just saying is that there's advantage. No one, that's not the, that is not the.
So you're saying they rather burn the thing down than
include us.
And so then to me, now that drives, if that's the case, then what do we do?
We've got to fight we've got to fight this whole process. That's what I said.
Is it truly separation then? Is it like, if they're saying, look, we're going to burn all this down anyway, do we just really focus then on separation and on our self-governance and our, places where we're already segregated? I
think that's part of the deal. Although they're not going to let you live in peace. That's those ladies in Atlanta, right? They said, okay, no white guy wants to invest in our companies. We're going to invest in our own companies. They sued them to stop that from happening, right? Or they sued to stop, law firms from giving people internships. I mean, so I think there is this thing will, if it burns down, if they're successful in burning it down, in the rebuilding process, we'll have to have our place in the rebuilding process. But I do think there's a group of people who think it's in their advantage to see this thing come apart. I think there's clearly based on again, we have a $40 trillion budget deficit.
Yeah.
They are trying to drive the country into the ground on purpose.
And there's no more borrowing, not enough tariffs that we can, and we can't really keep printing money. Right. So here's the other piece of it then. When the burn down happens, which it appears that it is already happening. I'm looking at a picture here of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is going like this to me, like do for self. Burn down. So now we got to start building and positioning ourselves so that we're part of the rebuilding.
Yeah, I think that's. I don't see any other path forward. I mean, the people who have a say in this have determined that getting rid of, again, they really tore down the ag economy to get rid of Hispanic immigrants. I mean, they don't care about what happens. It's not their, you can't have it. I mean, they're fighting amongst themselves over all this healthcare stuff. I mean, even the big guys are fighting, like the big university systems are fighting the big healthcare systems and the big insurance companies. I mean, so this is a zero-sum game we're heading towards.
And did you see where a lot of the pharmaceutical companies now, they're cutting out the pharmacies? You can just go directly to them.
Yeah.
Got like Lilly Direct and all that. You can order directly from the manufacturer instead of going to the pharmacy. So I get what you're saying. So then it sounds then to me, going back to what I had said in the book, that in some of our think tanks, we have to start thinking about not only how we cushion ourselves as this begins to fall and burn down, but how do we become part of the building process for ourselves, and what does that look like? And I think we have to start having these conversations. We can't just wait and go, okay, burn down, now what? I think we need to start having these conversations right now.
Yeah. And we should also, we plan for the worst and hope for the best. Hope that, rational people take over and people who aren't as hateful take over. I mean, think about it. They will burn fossil fuels until the earth is on fire. I mean, you're putting a rational thought on people who, knowing that they're destroying, like half of Florida is uninhabitable. They don't care. I mean, half of Louisiana is uninhabitable. They don't care. So, but maybe cooler heads prevail. Maybe something happens and we can work our way through it. But we have to prepare for the worst case scenario.
So, so FSIC, we're going to start having some think tanks. We got to get the money. I know that's what you're going to say.
People will have what they want to have. People want a nice house on the beach. They have a nice house on the beach. If they want good policy, they'll have good policy. They have to make a choice. I can't make that choice for them.
Well, that's my suggestion, that we work on some think tank money. We can pick one of these issues. It's going to take a lot of think tanks because this thing's falling and burning down to the ground.
On the other side, they have 30 or 40 of these. I mean, and they all have multi-million-dollar budgets. Not a single, even the smallest ones, like Charlie Kirk thing, they had 80 million. The Heritage Foundation has about 100 million. I mean, they have, but then they have smaller ones that have 20, $25 million budgets. So but you're not going to get this with $50,000.
Do we have any Black think tanks with any budgets?
No, not that I know of. Not that I know of. If you hear something, let me know. I mean, in the circles I run in, I don't hear of any people who are spending that kind of money.
I think we got to work on that. That's got to be the mission, and maybe the money's got to come from athletes, entertainers. I don't know. Yeah, I think we have to work on that, because we have to get some of these think tank organizations so we can begin to talk through what this is going to look like. Yeah.
No, I think, again, I will tell you, you just five off the top of my head, I know 5, right? On the other side, the conservative side. So you got Heritage, you got CPAC, you got Turning Point USA. Then you've got that Bloom guy. He's been the one who follows lawsuits. Those guys had enough money to start an organization in East Texas to get the judge they wanted for the abortion case they wanted. I mean, so there's no way around that. You can't beat them with wishes.
Even where they get this money from? Is it foreign money?
Most of it's rich people in America giving it to them. Most of it. There's probably some foreign money, but most of it's probably rich people. Okay. Yeah. Well, like the Sheldon Adelsons of the world and those kind of people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we got to figure out how to do that, because I think that in healthcare, in agriculture, in just about every industry, we need a Black specific think tank that's going to talk about what is the future going to look like for us in those particular areas. And in all of these small towns where all of a sudden we're finding ourselves governing ourselves that have all these environmental issues. Again, think tank, what are we going to do? Yeah. And we got to just get up and do something for ourselves, or else we definitely are going to suffer the consequences.
No, I think that's right. Yeah, Wendy, we're past time, but thank you for coming on. And we didn't even get to talk about the museum and reparations and all that stuff I want to talk about, but
I'll come back. Have everybody go and grab my book. It's they can go to artandscienceofbusiness.com. I think I put it in the chat. I put it in the chat, artandscienceofbusiness.com, or you can just go to Amazon and search my name, Sajidah Wendy Muhammad, and you'll see my books out there. But in my new book, The Art and Science of Business, I cover a lot of that stuff that we just talked about. think tanks, antitrust behavior, the self-governance, and all of the things that we need to do moving forward as these people burn this thing down, and as it falls, where are we going to land, and what should we be doing?
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for listening in. Good night.
Thanks, Kevin.